Let's start with the first and probably the most common exaggeration. Height. You'll notice this one almost everywhere, especially on dating profiles. It's what researchers like to call the 2-inch rule. Men often round up their height by 1 or 2 inches, sometimes even more if they think they can get away with it. And interestingly, the data backs this up. Studies analyzing dating apps like OkCupid and Tinder consistently show that a significant number of men, well over 60%, claim to be taller than they actually are. So why do men do this? It's not simply vanity, it's psychology deeply wired into human evolution and social perception. Height has long been associated with dominance, strength, and protection. Qualities that from an evolutionary standpoint were linked to better survival and reproductive success. A taller man, whether consciously or not, signals power and confidence, traits women often subconsciously interpret as indicators of good genes and leadership. It's not that modern men are hunting mammoths anymore, but our brains haven't evolved as quickly as our lifestyles. Those old instincts still play a role in attraction dynamics. So when a man adds a couple of inches to his height, he's not necessarily trying to deceive. He's trying to compete in a social environment that still values taller men as more attractive or more ideal. But there's also an emotional layer to this. Men often grow up in environments where height becomes a subtle measure of worth. Jokes, comparisons, and even small comments like, "You're shorter than I thought," can cut deeper than people realize. Over time, that builds an internal pressure to appear taller, to fit into that social mold that says bigger is better. And when society rewards those extra inches in confidence, attention, or opportunities, it reinforces the exaggeration. It becomes less about lying and more about survival in a social hierarchy that praises certain traits over others. So when you think about it, the height exaggeration isn't really about inches at all. It's about perception. It's about how men believe they're seen and how they want to be seen. The truth is, what really stands out isn't those added inches, but the confidence and authenticity behind the person. Because at the end of the day, no one remembers your height. They remember how you made them feel. The second way men tend to exaggerate is with their body composition, weight, muscle tone, and overall fitness. This one's fascinating because it blends physical image with identity. Many men shave off a few pounds when they talk about their weight or make themselves sound a little more muscular than they are. Sometimes it's just how they describe their build, athletic or fit, even when they haven't been to the gym in months. But again, this isn't just a matter of pride. It's psychological and rooted in how society shapes the male self-image. From an evolutionary perspective, strength has always symbolized protection and capability. Our ancestors didn't have gym mirrors, but they had survival pressures. A man's physical strength directly influenced his ability to hunt, provide, and defend, qualities deeply intertwined with attraction. Fast forward to modern times, and those same instincts are still playing out. Only now it's less about surviving in the wild and more about surviving in social hierarchies, dating culture, and Instagram feeds. Men still feel that quiet pressure to project physical power, even when life doesn't demand it in the same way. Science confirms this too. Research published in Evolutionary Psychology found that men consistently overestimate their muscle size and underestimate their body fat when self-reporting. It's what some researchers call the fitness illusion, that subtle distortion between how we see ourselves and how we want others to see us. Social media has amplified that illusion tenfold. Perfect lighting, strategic angles, and filters make it easy to present a version of ourselves that's not entirely false, but not fully real either. It's performance, digital body armor designed to meet cultural expectations of masculinity. And underneath it all, there's a sense of competition. Men compare themselves not just to other men, but to the curated images of male perfection constantly pushed online. The chiseled abs, broad shoulders, and impossibly lean physiques. That comparison breeds quiet insecurity. So when a man tweaks his stats, he's not trying to fool anyone maliciously. He's trying to survive that psychological battlefield where looking strong feels like being worthy. The truth is, real strength has little to do with definition or weight. It's about presence, confidence, and energy. The kind of strength that doesn't fade when the camera turns off. Now let's talk about another form of exaggeration that doesn't involve the body but still carries enormous weight in how men perceive themselves. Income. It might sound unrelated to physical stats at first, but it's actually part of the same psychological framework. Just as height or muscle can symbolize strength, money often becomes a symbol of capability, stability, and success. Studies show that many men inflate their income by 10 to even 30%, especially in dating contexts or early social interactions. And interestingly, this inflation isn't always about bragging. It's often about signaling value in a world that equates financial power with personal worth. From an evolutionary perspective, resources have always mattered. Historically, the ability to provide food, safety, and shelter increased a man's desirability as a mate. That instinct hasn't disappeared. It simply evolved. In modern society, instead of hunting or building, men signal their resourcefulness through what they earn, what they drive, or even what they wear. Subconsciously, exaggerating income isn't about showing off. It's about fitting into an old, deeply ingrained narrative that says, if I can provide, I'm valuable. It's a psychological reflex wrapped in social expectation. But beyond biology, there's also the cultural layer, the way modern media glorifies wealth as the ultimate marker of success. Everywhere we look, the message is clear: money equals confidence. And confidence equals attraction. Men internalize this early on. They grow up believing that their financial worth defines their romantic worth. That numbers on a paycheck somehow measure the man behind it. So when they inflate their earnings a little, it's often not to deceive others, but to feel momentarily equal in a system that constantly demands more. The irony is that most women, when surveyed, rank emotional stability, humor, and empathy far higher than financial status when it comes to long-term attraction. Yet men continue to feel that financial pressure because society doesn't celebrate emotional wealth the same way it celebrates material wealth. It's not about greed, it's about validation. Men aren't lying to impress, they're trying to feel enough. And maybe that's the real conversation we should be having, not how much a man earns, but how much he believes he's worth when the numbers disappear. The fourth exaggeration is probably the one everyone expects. And yes, it's the most talked about one too. When it comes to penis size, men tend to overstate their numbers far more than they admit, and science has proven this repeatedly. Studies published in the Journal of Sexual Medicine and other medical journals show that self-reported measurements are, on average, 10 to 20% larger than clinically measured ones. That means when men are asked anonymously, they often add a little extra length or girth. Even though no one will ever verify it, it's almost instinctive, a mix of ego, insecurity, and centuries of social conditioning about what manhood should mean. What's fascinating is that this exaggeration isn't really about sex, it's about identity. For many men, size becomes a symbol of power, confidence, and performance. They're taught, sometimes subtly and sometimes directly, that bigger means better in bed, better at pleasing, better as a man. From locker room conversations to adult media, the message has been the same for generations. So by the time they're adults, exaggerating becomes less about deception and more about protection. A way to guard against the shame society has attached to something as personal as anatomy. But here's where it gets interesting. When researchers actually surveyed women, the majority said they didn't care nearly as much about size as men think they do. What mattered most was communication, connection, and confidence. In other words, the pressure men feel to live up to this exaggerated ideal is self-imposed, fed by comparison and cultural myths rather than real-world expectations. Yet those myths are powerful. Pornography, in particular, has played a massive role in shaping what men think is normal, when in reality, what's shown on screen is often the extreme outlier, not the standard. So, when a man inflates his size, consciously or not, he's really trying to inflate his sense of adequacy. It's an emotional defense mechanism dressed up as bravado. And while it might seem small, it reveals something bigger about how deeply men tie their worth to physical validation. But the truth is simple. Confidence, skill, and emotional connection will always matter more than numbers. Because real satisfaction isn't about what you have, it's about how you show up. When you start to look beneath all these exaggerations, the height, the muscles, the money, the size, you begin to notice a pattern. It's not that men are intentionally trying to mislead anyone. It's that they're caught in a constant cycle of social comparison. From a young age, boys are taught, often without words, that being a man means measuring up. Whether it's on the field, in the gym, at work, or in relationships, the message is the same. You're only as good as the next guy standing beside you. This is what psychologists call social competition, the silent drive to appear stronger, more capable, or more desirable than others, even if it means bending the truth a little. And it's not hard to see where it comes from. Every culture has its version of the deal man, tall, confident, muscular, successful, and sexually skilled. Movies, advertisements, and social media all reinforce these archetypes until they start to feel like reality. When a man doesn't fit perfectly into that mold, he doesn't necessarily feel inadequate, but he does feel pressure to keep up. That's when exaggeration becomes a coping mechanism. It's a small way to feel like you belong in a world that celebrates perfection but rarely shows vulnerability. The male performance script, as some psychologists call it, runs deep. It tells men that their value comes from what they can display, their looks, their strength, their achievements, rather than who they are beneath all of that. It creates a kind of quiet competition that never really ends. Even among friends, there's often this subtle one-upmanship: who's earning more, who's lifting more, who's dating someone more attractive. It's not always spoken, but it's felt. And the more that competition drives behavior, the harder it becomes to separate self-worth from status. What's important to understand is that exaggeration isn't a character flaw. It's a symptom of cultural conditioning. It's how men try to navigate a world that tells them to be both strong and sensitive, dominant yet emotionally available. The truth is, that balance is nearly impossible under constant comparison. And that's the quiet truth behind all these exaggerations. Men aren't chasing perfection, they're chasing acceptance. Because deep down, every man just wants to feel like he's enough exactly as he is. After peeling back all these layers, the height, the muscles, the money, the ego, what it really comes down to is confidence. Authentic, grounded confidence. Because the truth is, exaggeration only fills the space where self-acceptance should be. When men feel secure in who they are, they don't need to round up their height, inflate their income, or overstate their performance. They understand that what truly attracts people and what sustains meaningful relationships isn't perfection, it's presence. It's that quiet self-assurance that says, I know who I am, and that's enough. Science supports this idea over and over again. Studies on attraction consistently show that confidence ranks higher than looks, status, or even financial stability when it comes to long-term compatibility. Confidence signals emotional security. It tells others you're comfortable in your own skin, that you don't need validation to prove your worth. And that's magnetic. Because when someone is genuinely confident, they create safety, they create trust. They don't have to perform, they just have to show up. But for many men, confidence has been misunderstood. It's been mistaken for bravado, dominance, or toughness. The loudest guy in the room is often assumed to be the most confident, but real confidence is usually quiet. It doesn't need to flex or prove anything. It's not built on comparison, it's built on clarity, knowing your strengths, accepting your weaknesses and not letting either define your entire identity. That's the kind of confidence that doesn't need exaggeration because it's rooted in authenticity, not approval. So much of the pressure men feel to exaggerate comes from believing that being loved or respected depends on meeting unrealistic standards, but it doesn't. What truly draws people in? What makes someone memorable is how genuine they are, how they treat others, how they listen, care, and communicate. Those are the qualities that last far longer than any illusion of perfection ever could. So when you strip away the numbers, the filters, and the false comparisons, you're left with something simple but powerful. Truth. And the moment a man starts leading with that truth, everything changes. Because real confidence doesn't come from what you show the world. It comes from finally realizing you don't have to exaggerate to be enough.